This is CFAB's Lunch and Learn session, and they will be talking to you today on practical support after family reunion. So welcome. Guys, it's 101. Do you want to just get started?
Yep.
Amazing.
That's fine. Thank you, Daniela.
No problem.
Can everybody hear me? Great, fantastic. Thank you for the thumbs up and for the encouragement. It's always good to know that we're off to a good start and that technology is not playing any tricks on us. So as Daniela said, welcome to this Lunch and Learn on practical support after family reunion. We're going to be looking at three main topics. We have quite a short period of time. We have 45 minutes today, and we'll be looking at the main tasks. That's the practical support that families mainly need after they've been reunited in the United Kingdom, the hurdles and the obstacles that they may face in accessing the support that they need, and then we will be looking also at best practice considerations. We will not have a Q&A, but what we have done is we have given you our email addresses, so do feel free to email either Ruth or me with any questions that you may have as a result of our session today. So I'll tell you just a little bit about me. My name is Chloe. I've worked in the field of migration for about 20 years in various organisations. I'm also an immigration advisor, and I've been working at CFAB, Children and Families Across Borders now, on the post-placement support project for almost 5 years actually. So I had to add that up in my head, but yes, almost 5 years. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague and friend Ruth to introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Ruth. It's great to have you with us. Today we're really excited to be with you for Lunch and Learn and talk about this really important topic for the families that are arriving. So I'm Ruth. I have been working at CFAB for 3 years. I'm a qualified social worker, and I was a qualified social worker for 10 years, qualified in 2000, and in the year 2000 worked in the local authority for 10 years, working in care leaving, in looked after children, and also in supported lodgings when I worked for the local authority, and also as a team manager in the local authority. And then more recent years in my life, was living in the Middle East. I lived in Syria and Lebanon. I'm also cross-culturally married to somebody from Syria, and I'm an Arabic speaker. And I've been working with CFAB for 3 years. So really, doing this work kind of combines some of my loves, really. Working in social work, and then also I often end up working with people particularly from the Middle East. So yeah, this is great. And also personal experience of the immigration experience, both having gone overseas and also come back to the UK, and for my husband moving to the UK as well.
Great, thank you, Ruth. Oh, sorry, I preempted you there. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add? No? Okay.
No. Thank you, Chloe.
All right, thanks. Okay, so a little bit about who we are at CFAB. So Ruth and I, as we've said, we work on the post-placement support project, which is part of the CFAB Family Reunification Service, and we provide support to children and young people who are reuniting or uniting for the first time with their families and relatives in the UK. The aims of the project really are to improve physical, psychological well-being, and this includes mental health, access to housing, and improved financial stability. We also aim to ensure that all children and young people have access to education, which means that their social and economic outcomes are optimised, and we work to support them to reach their full potential. We also work together to ensure that families are encouraged to stay together as much as possible. However, we do recognise and know that there are moments when children and young people will no longer be able to stay with their caregivers. And we do work with local authorities should that happen. So who is eligible in terms of to access our support? We work mainly with separated children or recent migrants to the UK. Some of these children may be asylum seeking children who've arrived in the UK, maybe accompanied by a family member, and maybe they're joining another family member already here in the UK. In order to be referred to our service, the child must have needs in one of the following areas, whether it's physical and psychological health services, or needing to access housing or benefits or education services. We will give priority to unaccompanied minors. We work with families throughout the UK, so that's really pan UK. Ruth was in Birmingham yesterday. I was in Liverpool on Monday. And we do recognise that there is a real need for support, particularly outside of London. We take self-referrals from families and individuals, and we also welcome referrals from other organisations and professionals. I will now hand over to Ruth, who will talk about the main tasks that a family will need help with after family reunion.
Okay, so because we're talking about practical support today, we just wanted to first of all think about what are the things that we need to do when a family arrive on family reunion, and what the support they're going to need. So this task really starts prior to the family arriving. So I think we've got another slide here. Yeah, thanks, Chloe. So really your task, your tasks for family, to support a family well with their transition, the task for supporting that family to arrive well in the UK actually starts prior to them coming to the UK. So prior to the family arriving, someone will have done an application for family reunion. It may have been a lawyer, it may have been a family friend, the family himself may have done it. You know, somebody will have done that application. So there'll have been some work done for that family to get their entry visa, a lot of work done by somebody to get their entry visa to come to the UK. So a lot of information we can gather before the family arrive. So it could be you're working in this role as a social worker, you're working with an unaccompanied minor who has their family arriving. It could be, yeah, you're working with a family that's just arrived. There will be a lot of information available prior to the family arriving that has been done and already gathered. So ideally, for a good transition, we want to start that work before the family arrive for this smooth transition. We want to gather information about who is coming, the number of children are coming, the ages of the children, if the family have any health issues. There also is going to be a sponsor for that family. So the sponsor is the person who either is already living in the UK. In some situations, that will be an asylum seeker who has come to the UK. Often that's an asylum seeker has come to the UK illegally on a small boat, on a flight. They've claimed asylum. They've been through the asylum process. They'll have been given their permission to stay as a refugee, and they're now applying for their family members to come and join them. So that person, that asylum seeker or now refugee, will have permission to stay in the UK and will have been living somewhere as a single in the UK. So that person, when they're living as a single in the UK, will either have been living in temporary housing, living in asylum accommodation. They may have been living in shared housing as a single. They may have been living with relatives. Maybe it's a child who's the sponsor, unaccompanied minor, in which case they may have been living in foster care or semi-independent accommodation. So whatever those scenarios, when the family arrive, they're going to need somewhere to live. So part of that assessment before the family arrive, or when the family arrive, is going to be what is the needs in terms of the housing for the family will be the first question. Where are they going to live? Because the housing they're currently living in is not going, most situations is not going to be suitable. Let me just go through the types of scenarios where families arrive and what are the options. So, for example, if somebody is either living in shared housing, maybe it's a man, a husband who has his wife and children arriving, a family reunion. He may be living in a shared house or he may be living with relatives. When his family arrives, they're going to need to access housing together as a family unit. If they have not made any provision prior to arriving, they're going to need to make a homelessness application to the local authority for housing. Most families will not know how to make this homelessness application and will need to be advised about their rights to make this application. The family, if they're homeless, going to be street homeless when they arrive, they will need to be they will have priority need under the homelessness legislation if there's children under 18 in the household. And this application for homelessness assistance can be made prior to the family's arrival as soon as the flights have been booked. So once the flights have been booked, we know the date that the family is definitely arriving. We can do some of this work prior to the family arriving, make an initial, help the sponsor to make an initial homelessness application, or we could use, there's a professionals referral route, and we can make a referral as a professional of a family that are going to be in need. So when the family arrive, they should be given emergency accommodation if they've made a homelessness application on the day of their arrival in emergency accommodation. An issue to be aware of is the issue of local connection for the family. So the family will need to have a local connection with the local authority that they make the homelessness application. To have a local connection, they will need to have lived in that local authority either for 6 months, either in shared accommodation or in maybe living with relatives. And they will need to provide proof that they have that local connection. So they may need to provide a letter of eviction from the shared accommodation, from the landlord, a contract, a housing contract of where they've been living, or a letter from their family members to show that they have been living with them for the last 6 months, and maybe proof of address that they've been living at that address through for example, their universal credit claim or something like that. So they'll need to show some proof of address that they've been living in that area for 6 months. For some people, they will not have a local connection for 6 months because they have been living in asylum, moving around when they've been in asylum accommodation, moving around from address to address. For those families that do not have a local connection and been living somewhere for 6 months, the place where they got issued their asylum decision will be the place where they have the local connection. So the place they were living when the Home Office made the decision to give them refugee status, that will be the place where they have the local connection and the local authority who are obliged to provide them with housing. Often families want to live in other places where they don't have a local connection, in which case they will need to privately rent in that scenario if they want to live. For example, I've had a family who were living in Chester. They had lots of social connections in Liverpool, but when he was given his refugee status, it was in Chester. His family then arrived 3 or 4 months later, and so he had to privately rent. He wasn't able to go to the local authority in Liverpool and ask for help with accommodation because his local connection was with Chester. So in that scenario, he had to privately rent. Another situation families will find themselves in terms of housing is they will need to privately, some families will have, as part of their family reunion application, have actually privately rented accommodation. Often the scenario for these families is that the privately rented accommodation is outside their means and the universal credit is not covering the full cost of the rent. So they may need to be supported to apply for discretionary housing payments to help them top up the rent or help them find more affordable rental accommodation. Just to cover another scenario that happens in terms of housing is often some situations that are outside the rules where there's been family reunion. For example, you might have a situation where a care leaver is sponsoring his siblings to come to the UK or his mum to come to the UK, and he may be living in a social tenancy. He may be living in a one-bedroom flat through a social housing provider or his care leaver council flat. And then he has his family arrive. In those scenarios, the young person is going to need to make a decision whether they want to have the family living with them and then make an application for rehousing, or whether they're going to separate as different households. And there will need to be some advice and thinking through with the sponsor about what are the housing options in that scenario, because it's not such a straightforward scenario that they can all just make a homeless application, and the family may need legal support as they work through what are the suitable options for them. So these are two different scenarios of different housing situations that need to be thought through. Okay, just moving on to, so that's one area, one main task. Another main task is to think about finances. Normally, the sponsor will have been claiming universal credit as a single, and now you're going to have to help the rest of the family set up their own claim for universal credit. So this will be potentially setting up a joint claim, helping the new adult member of the family who's arrived set up their own joint claim, setting up a joint claim for universal credit, linking the claims together, and then adding the children onto the claim for universal credit. Now, some families will need a lot of support through this process. If the family is illiterate, if they're not English speakers, or don't have digital literacy, then they will need a lot of support with this. They may need support setting up email addresses. They may need support to have a mobile phone number in the UK, setting up a new phone. So these are all things to be aware of in just helping them set up that universal credit claim. In scenarios where the people joining the family are maybe siblings, the process when they add the children onto the claim, they have to go through the process of the ID being verified. So this will be making sure the family has access to their e-visa, helping them to set up the e-visa and helping them to making sure they've got access to that. And then also making sure that they have access to, sorry, I'm getting distracted with the chat. I'm actually going to close it down for myself. And then making sure that they have access to e-visas, making sure they know how to access the e-visa, that they have their e-visa, and then making sure they have proof of address as well. If they need to verify children that are not their own children, they may need a supporting letter from a local authority social worker to prove that they are responsible for these children in terms of getting the claim verified. yeah, so that's just in terms of setting up the universal credit claim. They will also, we do need to be aware that when they're setting up the universal credit claim from the beginning, when the family have arrived, there is a gap of 5 weeks when the family will not receive any support at all as they set up this claim. And the family may not have any, may be destitute in this period. You may need to refer the family to food banks. You may need to, the Red Cross do provide some support for family reunion, some financial support. You may be able to refer the family for financial support in terms of for the first initial period as well, in that way. Or it may be that you need to apply to the local authority for Section 17 child in need support if the family are destitute. The other thing is to be aware of in terms of finances, to help the family set up a bank account, and also to help them make sure they all have access to a national insurance number and apply for one if they don't have one. If they've come into the UK on a settlement visa, they won't automatically get issued with a national insurance number, and you'll need to apply for a national insurance number for them. The other thing you'll need to do is just make sure if they're living in temporary accommodation or emergency accommodation that there's been a claim set up for housing benefit, and also a claim set up for housing benefit. If they're privately renting, that they've applied for the housing element in their universal credit claim. The other thing you'll need to set out for them in terms of finances is, depending on their living situation, is their rights and their responsibilities and their obligations as tenants in the UK, their responsibility for the utility bills, for council tax, and making sure they register for water, gas, electric, and set up and help them set up direct debits and explain to them how direct debits work. And with water, they can apply for a discount as well, making sure they have access to that. In terms of council tax, many families fall into the trap that if they may be placed, the local authority has provided with them with housing, maybe Waltham Forest, but they may then be placed in Shropshire. So they will pay housing, they will claim housing benefit in Waltham Forest for their housing costs, for the temporary housing or for the emergency accommodation, but they will pay council tax to Shropshire where they're living. So they need to register with Shropshire for council tax, and they need to claim council tax reduction or council tax support. It's called different things in different areas in the local authority where they are obliged to pay council tax. So we do need to make sure both applications have taken place, an application for housing benefit and an application for council tax support. Often that gets missed and they fall into arrears because that's been overlooked. In terms of education, we want to help we need to help the family register the children for school, set up school applications. If the children are in school, this will be an in-year school application if they're coming mid-year. If they're starting in year 7 or in reception, it'll be a new application for school, a standard application. But if they're in any other years, there will need to be an in-year admissions application. The other thing we will need to do for 16 and 18-year-olds, we will need to be referring them for ESOL, education, English as a second language place at college, and making sure that those applications have been made so they can access English as a second language. The specialist 16 to 18 courses that they can access, which are full-time. And for the, sorry, I didn't say on finances, they also need to apply for child benefit. Help the family apply for child benefit. If they're under if they're between 16 and 18 and not in education, the family will not be entitled to child benefit for them. So that's often a good incentive for the family to get their young people 16 to 18 in education. Yeah. For adults, there are also needs to learn English, referrals, setting up referrals to local colleges or to adult education. The other areas the family will need support in terms of education is buying uniform. They won't know how to access school uniform, or is there will the school help with buying school uniform? Issues such as applying for free school meals, application forms to the school, making the school aware that the children are vulnerable and the families vulnerable and may need extra support. Maybe liaising with the designated safeguarding lead in the school. Eligibility for school transport. We need advise families about all of this. Another thing is for if they have children under the age of 5, applications for nursery, different entitlements. If they're age 2 and upwards, they're entitled to 15 hours and on universal credit free nursery education, and for 3 and 4-year-olds, up to 30 hours a week. Finally, final 2 sections, just very quickly. Health is another area we want to be supporting our families. The main task is registering the family with the GP and any immediate health needs that they may need appointments booked for the GP, any urgent health needs that the family has. Also, many families are coming with the needs particularly for dental care. Finding dentists is really difficult, and I'll often advise families to phone NHS 111 to get referred to an emergency dentist if they're in pain. The other thing is also these families, refugee families, will have suffered trauma, and there may be need for mental health support services that they can either self-refer through the GP, or we will be able to connect them for counselling. You may need to refer the family for counselling or services or other specialist services through the NHS. Finally, I think just to be aware, I've just put immigration support there as one of the main tasks. I think one of the things is just to make sure the family have access to their e-visa, and also to make sure that the family are aware of the visa that they have entered the UK on, because we find a few years on, the families have don't realise they came in on 2.5 years leave to remain, and then they find themselves as overstayers in the UK because they didn't understand the provisions of the visa that they came into the UK on, whether they have a refugee visa and 5 years permission to stay, or whether they have 2.5 years. Yeah. Okay. So that's a quick overview. We could talk a lot longer on that. Chloe's now going to take a bit of time to talk about what are the hurdles that families face accessing these main tasks and these support.
Thank you, Ruth. So as Ruth has said, and I'm going to repeat, I'm going to be looking at the hurdles to accessing this help. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to housing and we'll take it from there. So in terms of housing, one of the things that's really important is looking at which local authority is responsible for housing the new arrivals. So sometimes it's very straightforward. For example, the father or the mother who is the sponsor is living here in Waltham Forest, let's say, for example, and they they go to Waltham Forest and they then ask for housing support. So that's pretty straightforward. And Waltham Forest would then have a legal duty to provide housing and homelessness assistance to the family, particularly if there are children under the age of 18. It can become more problematic and there can be more hurdles when it's not clear which local authority is responsible for housing the people who've just arrived. So, for example, I will give you, let's say that the young person who is in care is the sponsor, who's, for example, let's give a scenario. A young person is sponsoring his mother and his sisters to come to the UK. This young person is in the care of a local authority. Let's say he's in the care of, oh, I don't know, let's say Essex, for example. Essex are the local authority that have care for him. However, they have placed him in London. So he's living in a London borough. So when his family, his sisters and his mothers arrive, there can end up being a battle between the placing borough and the borough in which the young person is now living. What often happens is that the local authorities will fight it out amongst themselves. And at that time, you may actually probably will need a lawyer to assist. You will need a public law lawyer at that point who will be able to assist with challenging and, you know, discerning who is going to be responsible for housing this family. Normally, it will be the borough in which the family find themselves in. So it will be the London borough as opposed to the Essex borough in this particular scenario. But you do find sometimes that boroughs will fight it out between themselves as to who has responsibility for housing the new arrivals. Another huge obstacle is the delay in assessing homelessness. So some local authorities will say, oh, well, you're not homeless. You're not sleeping in the street because, you know, 5 of you can all sleep in one room. That's fine. That's not a problem. You just stay there and then we'll sort you out, you know, in a few, you know, in 56 days time or something. We know that it's not right for 5 members of the family to be sleeping in the same room. And we've actually had families, you know, where there isn't actually enough bed space for these 5 members to sleep. Even if they were all to sleep on the floor, there isn't actually physically enough space for these 5 people to be sleeping in one room. So it's very important to remember that you don't have to be street homeless. You don't have to be without a roof over your head in order to be homeless. People can be homeless by the fact that they are overcrowded, and that it isn't reasonable for them to carry on occupying their accommodation. Again, if you're having problems with this, get a housing lawyer or a public law lawyer involved to challenge the delay in assessing the homelessness application. The other huge problem is that if families are coming into the UK with no recourse to public funds, that's NRPF, that means that they can't access universal credit and all the public funds benefits. They can't access homelessness assistance from the local authority. In that case, families will have to ask for, if they have children, again, we're looking at families with children, if they are entering the country with families under the age of 18, then they will have to approach their local authority and ask for support under Section 17 of the Children Act. That is a challenge in itself. And again, you may need the help of a lawyer, particularly a public law lawyer, to help you with that. So I'm very aware of time, so I'm speeding ahead. In terms of finances as well, Ruth gave a really good overview of what needs to be done. And some of the obstacles that I've picked up on, I think we've both picked up on, again, is this child benefit thing where a lot of the young people will not be in school between the ages of 16 and 18, and therefore their parents will not, their caregivers will not be able to apply for child benefit for them. And that can actually be an incentive then to get the children into education. Another thing as well is that when you're dealing with the universal credit claim, first of all, let's say you're dealing with a father or a mother or a caregiver, check the date that their next universal credit payment is due, because it might be worth you just adding the young people or the children onto their claim initially before making it a joint claim with their spouse. Because sometimes what happens is that when you start a joint claim, you have to start the claim all over again. So that means that, for example, our sponsor may be being paid his universal credit in 8 days' time. He can then add the children onto his claim. And once he's been paid, he can then set up a joint claim with his spouse. Because what might happen is if you do the joint claim straight away, is that you then start the claim all over again from the beginning. You lose out the payment in 8 days, and it brings you back to another 5 weeks of waiting for the first payment. This is, it sometimes happens, it doesn't happen sometimes, but it's just to give you a little idea of some of the tricks of the trade, as it were. And again, remember, in terms of finances, as Ruth has said, do ask for Section 17 support as well if you have children under the age of 18 and there is a long time in waiting for money. Do remember that you can ask for an advance from Universal Credit as well. That's very important, and a budgeting loan as well. And again, if the family have come in with a no recourse to public vignette on their visa, again, Section 17 support of the Children Act. In terms of education, I just wanted to say that one of the obstacles is that it takes a long time sometimes to get children into school. And one of the things that you can do is, as soon as you know the arrival date of the children, nothing stops you from actually making the school applications. Yes, the children aren't here, but they will be arriving very soon, and you could actually potentially save yourself a few weeks of waiting when the child is here. Obviously, the problem is then if the local authority is super quick, they give the child a school place in 5 days, and the child still isn't here. But I'm sure that you can kind of fine tune that with the local authority and just say, well, actually the child's arriving in 10 days. Can you still keep the place open? But that's something that I realised the other day. Nothing stops us from making those school applications as soon as we know the date of arrival. And then in terms of health, one of the hurdles that many people face is gatekeeping. They're told that they need a proof of address, that they need ID in order to register with a GP, and that is wrong. You don't. Anybody can register with a GP. It doesn't matter on your immigration status. And I have seen some GPs that have now actually started saying you do not need proof of address or ID documents to register with us. So don't be put off by GP surgeries that insist that you do. That is actually illegal. They shouldn't be asking you for that. And as Ruth mentioned, always register the parent first with the GP. Because then it makes it easier to register the children. And then very quickly, in terms of immigration support, because we're running out of time, remember that in some families, different family members will have different immigration statuses. And that can make things very confusing and complicated sometimes. Some members of family may still be asylum seekers, some may have indefinite leave to remain, some may have refugee status, some may be British nationals, some may have limited leave to remain. There are all kinds of statuses that people may have. So it's really important never to assume anything and just to check the papers. What Ruth said is very important is that members of the family may just assume that because children have come in on a particular visa, that they then have the same visa as their parents, and they may not. And then they fall foul of the immigration rules when they suddenly realize, oh my God, the children's leave ran out in December. I was literally with a family in Liverpool on Monday with this. The children's leave had run out in December, and these children are now overstayers. So we're just deciding on what's the next best course of action for them. And the other thing as well, when family members are entering on very limited leave to remain to enter 2.5-year visas, they will then have to renew them up to 10 years in order to qualify for indefinite leave to remain. Is it worth those family members, if they are at risk in their country of origin, applying for asylum here in the UK? Again, the families need to get good quality, free legal advice on their immigration status. Because you can apply for asylum and also have your leave to remain at the same time. The two can run concurrently. I think that's what you say, concurrently. And the other thing is as well, in terms of immigration support, one of the hurdles is if the family have been given leave to remain with an NRPF, no recourse to public fund vignette, get that lifted, because without that, the family cannot access public funds and they can't access homelessness assistance. So one of the main things is to get that no recourse to public funds lifted. It does need to be done by someone who's qualified. So do get the family the legal advice that they need on that. Right, that is me, very Speedy Gonzalez, and I will now pass over to Ruth, who is going to talk about good practice considerations.
Okay, right. Right. Okay, so thank you, Chloe, for that wonderful run through on some of the hurdles. So just as a kind of pointer at the end, as we're working with these families with these tasks that we're supporting them with, what are some really good things to be thinking through and have in our minds as practitioners of how we can support these families well and effectively? Right, first of all, just to say, to talk about trauma-informed practice, first of all. all of these families that we're working with that are coming on refugee family reunion visas will have experienced some kind of trauma. They may have been either from the journey to the UK, the sponsor may have suffered trauma. The family, they've also had a period of family separation. This could be, 6 months. It could be, I met a family yesterday, the period of separation had been 10 years that the family had been separated. And they'll have experienced trauma in the country. There may be the country of origin. They may have experienced trauma in the country that they were the third country that they were maybe refugees in prior to coming to the UK. They may have experienced trauma on their journey, trauma from separation. So there's multiple layers of trauma that these families will have suffered. So we really need to approach this with a trauma-informed lens and trauma-informed practice as we work with these families. And we do see, as we work with these families every day, the evidence of trauma in their responses. If you think about the trauma-informed practice, the learning we have from trauma-informed practice about responses to trauma of the flight, fight and freeze responses. And I see this every day working with families as I work with them, trying to help them make their universal credit claim or make their housing application, just in terms of how they're functioning, that they're still in responding in these ways. And so what's important is to acknowledge this and notice this in our families that we're working with and that we're supporting, and realize it's not the family is being difficult, but actually this family is traumatized, and we need to be trauma informed about how we're working with them, and take time to ask what has happened. So and I think often the process of even arriving in the Ukraine is often re-traumatizing in itself, that process of having to work out how to live here for the first time. It's often re-traumatizing for them as well, back in that place of powerlessness, back in that place of not understanding anything, of maybe not having so many barriers of accessing services. This in itself is re-traumatizing. And for some of these families, we really need to take time to listen to their stories, to ask what's happened. So when they tell you, I went to the job centre and it didn't work, what happened? Listen and take time to understand and be a container for them of their experiences, and to offer a way forwards to them, that we can help them to contain their emotions and contain what's happened for them, so that we can help them plan a way forwards. I think that's really important as we work with these families. Another important thing is for us to be culturally sensitive to these families. We're going to be working with interpreters often with these families. It's important for us to be culturally aware. I'm an Arabic speaker, but there's many different types of Arabic. A person from Syrian Arabic is different from Moroccan Arabic. Often I talk to people after their home office interviews, and they'll tell me, I didn't understand an interpreter. They were Tunisian, they speak Tunisian or Moroccan Arabic. I couldn't understand them. And we don't realise that actually we do need to be culturally aware and have cultural sensitivities about and ask good questions, even when we're getting into what interpreter are we using, what's the Arabic that you speak, what's the dialect that you speak, how can I find an interpreter that you will understand. It's not good enough for us just to bring an Arabic interpreter. Another cultural sensitivity, when we're visiting the family home, how do men and women greet each other in the what's the typical greetings? Asking the family, how do you greet each other in this family? Often, sometimes men will not greet. They'll put a hand to the chest as a sign of respect, as a greeting. Do we take our shoes off when we enter the home? Ask the family. Do you normally take your shoes off when we enter the family home? So we really what's the family's how do they express hospitality to you? Often families are very grateful for the support and taking the time to drink a cup of tea with the family, to receive their hospitality. I think often they're receiving a lot of support from us, and it's in terms of power balances and the family wanting to offer us something, receiving their hospitality if we're able as well. Is also good for them to feel that they are able to offer something to us. The other thing, good practice considerations, is remember to listen to the voice of the child. Often at this stage when families are arriving, there's a lot of things we need to sort out. We need to sort out where they're going to live, how they're going to claim their benefits, and the children get lost in this process. And I think it's important to take time to listen to the children. What are your hopes and dreams when you've arrived in the UK? What are the questions that you have? What are the things that you want to happen for you? I was with a child yesterday, age 14, and he was telling me about the school system in Syria. And he had no understanding of the school system in the UK and was really stuck on the fact that he was going to be on a different school year. And just taking time to explain to him that, this is how the school system works, and you don't need to pass the year to go into the next year. Everyone of that age is in that year. Just simple things that the children need to hear the voice of the children. We're running out of time, so I will carry on for take a few more minutes, but if you have to leave, I'd just like to show you the final slide, which is we're not going to take question and answers in our session today because we realise there's a lot of material we've covered, and what we'd like you to do is be able to either email myself or Chloe if there's any specific questions that have come up, and please email us and we will get back to you with any questions that you have, if you need us to go into a bit more detail for that, and we do appreciate there are people that have to leave. So please take a picture of that on your phone, and then in your own time, please get in touch with us. What we'll do is we'll just go back to the good practice considerations for those that have got a bit more time. Another one is a good practice consideration is to think about the way that you work with the family. We really want to work with the family in a way that empowers them. We want to we really want these families to be able to function independently in the UK. So if that means taking the time to show the work with the family rather than do it for the family, which is going to be a lot longer, we want to take the time to do that, so that in the end that you're not going to need to provide so much support to the family if we can show the family how to do it. You don't want to give them a fish, you want to teach them how to fish. I think is a proverb. That's what we want to do for the families. So yesterday on a visit with a family, he'd received all these emails asking him for proof of his universal credit, and he didn't know how to do it. So just a simple taking 5 minutes during the visit to show him how to access his payments in his universal credit statement, and then how to download that onto his phone, and then how to upload it again. Very simple, something I take for granted. This family had no idea how to do it. It was actually very simple, just to show him the steps and then get him to do it. And then he knew how to do it, and that will save a lot of time for him. He'll be able to send to housing benefit, to council tax support, to his housing worker, how to send his universal credit statement or his bank statement. Really simple skills we don't realise the families don't have, and we can actually enable them and empower them to do, and then they can feel more able to help themselves as well. The other thing to be aware of, just good practice considerations, is when we're assessing these families and working with these families, is to think about is this a child in need, or are there any child protection concerns? Are there any safeguarding concerns? When a family needs a lot of support, that doesn't mean it's child protection. And it doesn't mean they're a child in need necessarily. It could do. And it could be that the family just needs support from a refugee organisation in their area that they can be linked up with, that can provide them with that support for a period of for a year. So look for these there are lots of community groups and voluntary organisations that are providing support to refugees, so that they do not need to meet the threshold of children in need services or child protection or safeguarding issues. Signpost them to these community groups in the area so that the family can get this ongoing support and also meet other families. But there will be families that do meet the threshold for children in need, that really you've offered a lot of support and they're still not managing, and they're still struggling with debt, getting into debt because they're not able to maintain their universal credit claim or their housing benefit claim, or deal with get the children to school. So there will be families that meet this threshold of the children in need. It is important for these families to make those referrals, so the families, the local authority is aware that these families meet a threshold of need that can't be met by community groups. And also to be aware of safeguarding issues that the family may be presenting, maybe in relation to domestic violence in the family home, maybe in relation to chronic neglect. And make those referrals if they are reaching these thresholds for an assessment of need. The other good practice consideration I think for us to be aware of is that we are providing these services to the families in the context of the hostile environment. The immigration policies in the UK, immigration legislation in the UK is there to keep people out, or trying to keep people out. And we're kind of working with these families, welcoming them in at that point, and so many of the services have to act as gatekeepers, and this is built into our legislation. So as the family interact with services which are gatekeeping, and they're being asked again and again, well, what's your immigration status? Have you got the documents? Imagine how this makes a family feel, and imagine the racism and the feelings of not feeling wanted, and that we're not wanted here in the UK. And I think this is really important, and we really have a role as workers and as practitioners to advocate when the families are facing barriers to services, and advocate for them and to make them feel welcome, and to challenge racism when we see that. I have had situations where blatantly expressions of racism statements that families, and we do need to challenge this when we see this and be advocates and on their behalf for them. So that's just some of the things we need to be thinking about as practitioners as we support these families. I'll finish there.
Thank you,
so
Ruth.
Yeah, go ahead, Chloe.
Sorry. Just to thank you so much, Ruth, and thank you to everybody for attending as well today. Please do drop us a line if you have any questions or you'd like to ask anything. Sorry that we went over longer than anticipated. We hope that we haven't interrupted your need to rest and to have a lunch break too much. And we hope that you benefited from this time that we've spent together today. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody,
us,
for joining.
and from all the families and the children as well. And here is our free advice line. And also, if you would like to make referrals to our service, you can use the refugee.families@cfab.org.uk email inbox.